Welcome to another episode of the Agronomy Highlights podcast. I'm your host, Ryan Spellman, and I'm joined here with my lovely co-hosts. We got both on today, Dwayne Miller and Justin Brackenridge. Justin and Dwayne, how are you guys doing?
Hi, I'm doing good. We got two for the price of one today, me and Justin, right, Justin?
Big deal day, yeah.
Yeah, it is a big deal today. For a couple of reasons. We have a great show for you guys. We're going to talk about planting conditions, kind of tips to prepare for planting, and kind of all of the things you should be thinking of this time of year. And one of the reasons we have everyone on today is this is going to be my last show as a host. So I have taken a new role, and our guest here is celebrating to that.
If I had my soundboard, we could hit applause or so. Yeah.
Yeah, applause. Yeah, so anyways, I've accepted a new role at the university working with the Esker lab, which does field crop pathology. So I'll be kind of managing field trials and still connected to extension. So I'll still be seeing all of you guys here, but I need to take a little bit of a step back from the podcast. So, that's probably one of the hardest things for me to leave with this role. So thank you to the audience for your support, but I'm leaving you with two wonderful, excellent hosts who've been hosting this whole time. So yeah, let's kind of get into it.
I can say from our standpoint, Ryan, we truly have mixed emotions here. All across the board from us here at Penn State. We know you're still going to be around, but gosh, we're just not going to see that smiling face every day like we're used to seeing you. But you've done an awesome job in taking this podcast, that's something that started in its infancy, and expanding it with the help of Justin, and appreciate all your work on the podcast here.
Yeah, thanks, Dwayne. I appreciate that.
I think we're realizing, maybe everybody listening or the others always thought like, well, what's Ryan do around there, right? No, now that we're having to figure this out for ourselves, we're having to learn how to edit, and we're having to, learn all these things. So you don't always appreciate what people do until maybe you're looking at what they're doing. So keep that in mind and perspective. But like Dwayne said, we're glad to see you going to something that's going to make you happy, and but we are sad to see you leave us.
Well, I appreciate those kind words. Like I said, this is one of my favorite things to do, and I'm gonna go have fun running some plant pathology based trials and seeing you guys at meetings. But yeah, I think you guys are gonna do an excellent job. And I know you're just gonna have to both practice your welcomes over and over until you find your voice here. So, but I think you guys have been great to work with on this show. And the audience has been great. It's been awesome to meet people in the real world who listen to the show. So hopefully I'll be back, to give some research updates every now and again. But, definitely stepping back as a host. So thank you all. And let's get into the main part of that.
Let's do it.
Yeah. So Justin, why don't you introduce what we're talking about?
Sure. So this is going to fall in line with some of the things that we've been doing, brainstorming, right? We sit around and we kind of work on these things like quarterly. Maybe we try to plan 3 to 4 months worth of them at a time. And that gets a little challenging because you're looking what is going to happen over the next 4 months, but how do you also be kind of reactive and get some of the timely things? But one of the ones that came up, those interesting for all of us, is this discussion about planting considerations. I know we've done things in the past on, like early spring assessments of corn and soybeans. We've talked about planting small grains. We've done stuff with pasture and hay. But I think this idea of just the last couple years, springs have been, I think where I'm at, they were completely opposite, right? One of them was so dry you couldn't get anything in the ground. The other one was so wet that you couldn't get out there to even try to get anything in the ground. And so that kind of put us to this idea of let's prep for planting. If you're sitting here today and you're thinking about what things do I need to consider and get in a row, what would they be? And so we brought on Voight, one of our, I'll let him introduce his title. Maybe it's Senior Extension Educator. I'm not quite sure. But Dale's with us from Lebanon County. He's been here a long time, has a lot to share. He's kind of a lot of our go-tos when it comes to practical agronomic work that we're working on. So Dale, welcome. Thanks for joining us today.
Well, thanks, Justin. It's great to be here, and it's good to see Ryan moving in a different role, that the growers will have more access to the plant pathology side, and that certainly comes into what we're talking today with seedling diseases. So, and planters and how that all kind of fits together. But yeah, I don't think I'm an expert in this. It's just, I think I have a lot of time and grade and followed a lot of planters and did a lot of standard deviations of stand and looked at some of these yields as they keep going up. And it's a lot, the planter is the one time you have one shot at it.
I
Get
guess
it right.
that's one thing that I was thinking about as Justin was talking about Udell, and I think that you put that into perspective, and you've got one shot to do this, and there are so many variables, and we'd like to just try to take a look at some of those, and where can you get better? Where can you improve just a little bit every?
And I think that, to start out with the beginning with the end in mind is that, years ago, and I still think it holds true, is that a lot of growers tend to want to run 24 hours a day when it's fit and go, go, go. And, we've always recommended 25% early, 50% middle, and 25% late. And so if you have 100 acres, you could probably plant that all in one day, but should you? It might be better that you plant 25 acres of that and then wait a couple weeks till it's really ideal planting, and then plant the majority, maybe 50 acres, and then wait a few more weeks and plant 25 late. It's not a bad strategy. You spread your risk of drought in the fall over a period of time. And, we've all been there. You get to winter meetings and they say, oh, well, my latest planting did the best. And, or my earliest planting did the best. And the fact is, on our marginal soils that are a little droughty, you have to have a little different approach to how you plant. So, yeah, it's a great topic to go on here.
One of the things that I'm not sure, maybe you told me this or someone's told me over my career, is that when you're looking at reasons that stands may fail in the spring, at this point, there's a bunch of really good genetics in our crops. And there's a bunch of really good chemistries, and there's a bunch of good fertilizer that often people want to look to those things. But typically, when I go to a farm after having some of these conversations, my first question usually starts with, what's the planter look like? Right? Not that I'm interested in the color of it to make my observation, but what does the maintenance or the setup of that planter look like? Because if you're putting in good seeds, you're using good chemistries, you're using a good program, how is that placement going to work? It can be as simple as having your fertilizer, instead of a 2x2, maybe it's 2x1 or something, right? Like, it doesn't take much when you're on contours or things that can really lead to some diminished stands. And so I think, let's jump into some of these considerations. Let's jump into some of these things we're looking at. Dwayne, where do you want to start us?
Well, let's start with soil conditions, because you mentioned, Justin, two opposite extremes over the last 2 years, and guys, we get talking to folks, and man, we're no-tilling, and it was just a little too wet, but I had to do it. So, Del, talk to us about, how do soil conditions play into planting decisions that we make in springtime?
Yeah, that's a great question to start out. I've been going daily on that soil temperature website from Syngenta, and it's really changed. And so the first thing on soils would be soil temperature, and that's going to vary by what densities in the soil, what your residue is. There's a lot of great research that was done by Lynn Hoffman years ago, where he looked at, road cleaners, for instance, sweeping off the road cleaners, and that's almost a 12-degree bump in soil temperatures around the seed. And that's great. That's a big deal, depending on that. But, there's other things, like I think down there in some of our soils in the southeast of Lebanon area, and I'm sure every county has these kind of soils, but it has a lot of clay in it. And so when you got 30%, 40% clay, then you're going to have to vary your closing wheels, because, go with at least one spoke part of that. And that's what we use at the research station because of the clay. So you avoid that number one thing, which is compaction right above the seed. And Justin kind of alluded to what are some of the main causes of stand variation, and it's that crusting that occurs just above the seed. And the plant will tell you when you dig that corn seedling up or soybean, if it's all crooked, because it had to really fight to get through that, that told you that maybe you have to have a different strategy to managing that. Some soils, the last couple of years with the strip tillage, where you do the strip till in the fall, and then you freshen that in the spring. So you're basically working that little 8-inch area in the spring. In the morning, you get nice hot sunny day. By afternoon, it's nice and friable, and then you plant in there, and you have no sidewall compaction, and it's almost like perfect conditions, almost a hybrid of what we used to do 30 years ago with, disking and letting it dry out and then planting. But you're only doing that in a small area. And it works great for, if you got heavy residue like cover crops, you get a 2-foot tall cover crop and you go there and you have these nice strips that you plant into. You avoid the hairpinning, which can happen where you push down the residue into the row itself, and then you're fighting with moisture that way. So other soil conditions that apply here is the surface pH. So our soil test kit's been flying out of the office. I saw today I got to restock our manure test kits. That's a whole nother podcast, but getting that surface pH, I've seen pHs down to 2 inches deep. And so that amount of aluminum there, now you're really limiting root growth. And those are all soil things that you need to make sure it's corrected prior to even running the planter.
I want to jump back to soil temperature a little bit. There are a lot of things online. So let me preface this. I guess I'm thinking about things that are easy to do from your home that you shouldn't overlook, right? And soil temperature with technology and AI and satellites and stuff, like, it's never going to beat going out with an instant read probe and sticking it in the ground and figuring out what your temperature is.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, there are so many things out here. Like right now, I'm looking at one and they're saying our temperature today is 53 degrees. What temperature and what is that trend that you're looking for before you start planting corn and beans?
Yeah, so good question. It's definitely, the online resources are estimates. So it's going to kind of get you to where it's time to go out with your 2-inch probe and stick it down there and see what it actually is. There's 2 different timings that they've done research on. It's, the morning one, like 9 o'clock in the morning, and then the other one is at 1 p.m. in the afternoon to stick the probe in. And then when that's 50 degrees, that's usually go time.
Okay.
Do you look for a forecast that yesterday it was 49,
Yeah, right.
today it's 50. Del, do you look for that forecast to continue to have that warming trend versus, we finally got there, but now the 10-day is looking pretty cold and wet?
Yeah, I think so. I've been feeling a lot of calls right now. It's kind of similar to this, is like burn down herbicides. We want those nighttime temperatures to be right around 40 if you're going to use a product like glyphosate. And if you look at that, I didn't look at today's. I should have done that in preparation, but I think it's similar with trying to determine when we can run, is looking at soil temperatures at night. What's the nighttime temperatures? And then also how protected it is. I mean, if you get a heavy residue on top and you're getting 45, 50 in the soil, that residue is gonna moderate that overnight. So there's a lot of factors there that I don't know just what. I think the online stuff you're mentioning, like I do the Syngenta one, just to
that's what I use.
Time to go out and check.
Yeah, yep. And I think so. Like, kind of back to what Dwayne was saying, Ryan, you got to get in here. You're gonna have to talk louder if you would get in here.
That's fine. That's fine. I'll jump in at some point.
Okay. A week ago, well, let me say last night, our low temperature where I'm at in Southwest PA was, I think it was 52. 3 days ago, it was 17 degrees, right? And so, like, don't let yourself fall into this trap, because we're looking at the forecast and it's maybe all above 40. 2 nights ago, I was outside covering up plants that, so you have to look at this and take some of this with a grain of salt of understanding your own climate and your own weather and your own trajectories. But just that, next week looks good. It's the 1st of April. I don't think that that's the best thing for everyone to go just because the soil temperature may be reaching that 50-degree mark.
Yeah, and I have this conversation a lot with growers, and it all depends on how many acres you got to plant. If I have some growers, I have about 30 growers that are over 3,000 acres, and so they've got to start early to get the bulk of their acres in that prime time planting of, first, second week of May, but they'll probably be starting sometime the first, second week of April so they can do that. And then I have growers that they, they only takes them a couple days to plant and they can wait till it is ideal, the end of April and soil temperatures are up and, so that and like you said, Pennsylvania is so diverse and the elevations are so different. You get up in Potter County and that is a completely, or down in Somerset. I've talked to growers that moved from Lebanon up to those areas and it's just like you said, you've got to adapt to your own, what clay levels are in your soil and also this whole temperature sway and elevation, which makes a big difference.
I used to work with a farmer and he would say, you have to start before you can finish, right? And I'd always ask him, are you done planting yet? And I think in the spring, that's as much of a true story as anything. So the last couple years, we've had some pretty tight planting windows, and that can either be because it being hot and dry, or maybe cold and wet. Maybe we've had a few days of rain off and on. But if we do finally get some good weather, and you're looking at 3 or 4 days, what do you prioritize? Is it tillage? Is it fertilizing? Is it planting? And what strategies can we use to help us figure that out?
Yeah, so that's a big one too. I've always kind of leaned towards if it's ideal planting that you don't think you're going to get sidewall compaction and you're going to get good coverage of the seed. If you're shooting for 1.5 inches of soil on top of that seed, I would tend to want to plant first. And I think there's a lot of new products that are out there, like Certain, for example. I'm advocating Certain, but that Sharpen that has the ZC formulation that you can go over top, that gives you an option. So you might have to take your product back and switch out a little bit, but there's options there that if you had planted corn, that you could make some adjustments there. And the nitrogen, I don't get excited about it. I think that my standpoint over the years has been, why put that out there early when you're exposing it? Like last year, we got burned, right? We got 20 inches of rain on top of this stuff. We lost 80% of our active ingredient herbicides and we lost the majority of our nitrogen. So your fully last year, fully side dress was a huge differential. If they didn't side dress, they lost a lot of late yield. And that's a whole nother topic. But getting back to your original question, I would prioritize it by what's the soil doing. If it's ideal for planting, I'd get it in the ground. If that was your 25% of your farm you're going to plant and it's ideal, I would get it in.
So, Del, I think you made a good point there about like losing your nitrogen application because, yeah, last year that was a great example of that. If in my area, it was like the month of May was just, really wet. And this is maybe when, if you are working with wheat, right, this would be a good window earlier on to fertilize your wheat if you need extra fertility before you get out in the field and work on the fields that are to be planted. Now, you also kind of mentioned the sidewall compaction, in your last answer and this one too. Can you talk about exactly what conditions we need to be worried about for that? Is this mostly a moisture thing? And how much moisture does it take to really have a bad sidewall compaction problem?
Yeah, I think I see it most common when it's at field capacity where it's saturated, right? And that smearing action of the double disc opener on the side just makes a clay pot. And that's where your 35-40% clay. I mean, I have some growers that they can plant pretty much into pea soup and it will not compact because it's so much silt in there. But when you get the clay content up and then, how do you know what you have? Well, that's where soil testing comes in. Get a measurement of your CEC and the fractions, and that will tell you what clay content you have. But you already know experientially. I mean, Dwayne's been farming forever. He knows where his ground gets that clay in it, and you got to stay out of it. And some areas he probably knows it could probably run there, and just by years and years of doing it. And so I think that this, to avoid soil compaction, that's where I think the strip till came in. I think strip till also is a slug strategy, which is another thing that kind of goes along with planters. Like, what do we need to be doing with our planter now also for pest control? Because a lot of our pest control comes through that planter. Whether it's the BT corn that you're purchasing, whether it's the seed treatment that's on there, whether it's, slug things you put on, whether you're using potash fertilizer over the top or sweeps to keep the slugs from getting down in the furrow. And the sidewall compaction is the number one problem with slugs. When you leave that slit open, and it's wide, it's like a super highway for the slugs to drop down in there and just go. So that kind of ties into with Justin's comments about when you have a window like that, do you plant first or do you spray? And if it's ideal where you're going to avoid all of that issue, then I think I'd roll it in. So I don't know if I answered your question enough, because there's a lot of strategies there to deal with it with different closing wheels.
When you walk out onto a farm, what keys you in that there may be sidewall compaction? Right? I mean, we've talked about what it is, how we get it, how to avoid it, but maybe thinking a month from now or 2 months from now, what tips you off that you maybe didn't make the right choice?
Oh, I can even look in the fall, Justin, when their combines are running, and I'll look over and I can still see the slit open.
Okay.
That's that clay pot compaction. And, not only that, but a lot of our post herbicides, do not like to have exposed roots. And so if you have that slit open and then you spray some of these residuals, amides like dual, on top of that, you get it right in there where the roots are exposed, then you have damage from that too. And I'm concerned about the wheat. We had late planted wheat. This is off topic, but we did have some heaving from the alternating shrink and swell. And there are some roots that are exposed. So Harmony Extra right now, I've been telling growers to kind of wait a little bit more, let those secondary roots get in really deep and then hit it. So yeah, that's a good question though, of how to tell. You can tell really easily, just jump off your planter. If it's not closing, then it's not, you've got to do something. You got to intervene, because it's like this is the one time you get to do it. And so that's kind of a critical thing.
Yeah, I think you bring up a good point there, that the sidewall compaction issue, it's not just that, you're going to hinder some root growth that could have gone outwards and it's going to really stall that early on, but then you have an exposed seed. And that is one of the larger challenges associated for a number of reasons when it comes to pest damage, when it comes to, exposure to the elements, and then just like poor soil contact. There's a lot of things that can happen there. So, maybe this is a good way to lead into talking about your nutrient kind of considerations at planting or just before planting, right? Another thing that we can do if we have proper row closure is to make sure we have the right nutrition for that plant, like to get started and get started early. And, some of those things will change with the soil temperature and how early. Maybe you can talk about some of the considerations when it comes to your recommendations on nutrients at planting.
Yeah. So nutrients and sidewall compaction go hand in hand. And we see that you don't see it until V5 to 7. That's when your potash deficiency really pops up. And a lot of the cases I've been involved in, I come in, we pull a soil test, the K levels are fine, but the plant's telling you it's potassium. And when you look and you're like, okay, well, you got sidewall compaction. So the plant could not explore the soil to get to the levels that they needed. And so we can certainly correct that with a dry muriate of potash over the top and correct it really quickly. But that should have been corrected at planting. It couldn't extract it because it couldn't get out of that row. So that's a big thing. Now, when you get into starter fertilizers and all of those kind of things, if you look at the research, it's really difficult for us to show any kind of yield response. What's the return on investment of starter? Not there. Now, if it's rented ground and you got to provide the P and K, and it's low in P and K and there's low pH, Doug Beagle has done some work where he had, pelletized lime to try to react with in the row, and then putting P and K to the side that provided what it needed just for that year, because you don't know if you're going to run it next year. So you don't want to correct everything and then somebody else take it over. So I know I'm getting off track here a little bit, but there's a lot of factors there too. But if you own the land and you're going to go in there, if it's extremely early, that's where this is where soil temperature comes in, because that phosphorus and things like that you put on with the seed can get, when it's cold, it's not available, can be not available. A low pH, you could have really excessive phosphorus levels, but if your pH is really low, then it's not available. So there's a whole nother podcast just talking about that whole thing.
So now, Del, that's interesting that you're saying with colder temperatures, you run some risks of like nutrients either like fine with the soil or not being able to get into the plant with the starter fertilizer. Like, I could see it like the other way as well, like, because oftentimes the thought is, okay, if I'm going earlier, I need to get my plant going faster, so I'm going to add starter fertilizer, right, to make sure it pops up, right, a pop-up fertilizer. So you're saying that that's kind of poor advice, right, and that the colder it is, you're not going to get the efficiency that you need out of that for fertility.
I'm glad you said that, because that's not what I'm really saying. I'm saying we haven't been able to prove the yield advantage. So Penn State, we have to, if we recommend something, it needs to be something to the grower that's going to return on investment. And we see those things, Ryan. So if you're early planting and you use starter fertilizer, you do get that greening effect. And you do get even ammonium. When Doug and Greg did just ammonium sulfate or just a little bit of nitrogen, but no P and K at all, it reacts with the available P and K that's already in the soil and makes it available early. But when it comes to the yield advantage, we didn't see any yield differences. So yeah, it made me feel good. I slept really well at night, but it didn't respond. We saw that with molasses. Some of you guys were involved with the molasses stuff. And we get a starter response out of the molasses. The 3 gallons in the row on the seed, you get this nice green growth. Everything looks great, but we can't get a response to yield. And that's the frustrating part. But with slugs, all right, if you got a real problem with slugs, then I think we have to include the starter. It's another management tactic for slugs, row cleaners, making sure you have no sidewall compaction, starter fertilizer, T-band on the top of the row, put a concentrated band of the fertilizer. Those are all techniques that help with slugs to keep them away from that growing seedling. And once we get the V2, 3, it's going to grow away from slug damage, but we have to keep that from getting in the compaction zone. Keep compaction out.
Most people think fires start with flames, but they don't. Most flames start with heat. Control the heat, control the outcome. That's why Mark Twinoffel with Midwest Ag Risk Control focuses on one question: how fast can you control the heat? Around the farm or in the field, Mark recommends the Enforcer One system with Firebowl foam, built to cool fast, cling to surfaces, and stop reignition. To find out more about this system, call or text Mark at 618-521-6805 or online at enforcer.com.
Are you or your ag-related business interested in becoming a sponsor of the show? Support Penn State Extension's mission to provide trusted, research-based agronomy insights by sponsoring Season 4 of the Agronomy Highlights podcast. Advertising opportunities are available, and you can register directly or take a look at the sponsorship packages and pricing in the link below in the show notes. Feel free to reach out to me directly by emailing rms6953@psu.edu if you have further questions. Now, back to the episode.
I've got a question that relates back to nutrients. So with the price of fertilizer, if I have a farmer that's saying, hey, I normally didn't have access to manure, but you know what? I got a call on some. I'm going to put it on. Any thoughts or considerations that they should have if they're using manure for the first time as a nutrient source?
That's a great one. I just talked to a grower last night, actually, about the same thing. So put the manure on. Don't put more than 50 pounds of nitrogen on with a commercial fertilizer. And then plan to use either the chlorophyll meter or a green seeker at side dress time, and then meet the demand then. Yep. That's a great, absolutely timely topic that needs to get out there. If you're new to manure, go ahead and put it on. It's sort of you don't know exactly what's going to be available. I mean, if it rains the next day, you might get all of what you calculated, but if it doesn't rain for a week, you might only get a fraction, 20% of what you put on. And the only way to know that is let the plant tell you at side dress time.
Great advice, right?
Yeah.
No more than 50 units of
15.
nitrogen at planting time. Use the chlorophyll meter to tell you the rest.
Yes.
I think manure is one of those tough things like to do, because we have to think about it as like this is not a blended complete fertilizer that we're handing in a soil test and saying, give me 100 of units of N and 75 units of P and 150 units of K, right? This is so many levels of error that can be put into manure. I mean, one, you're trusting a book value, or you're trusting that your sample telling you what it is exactly what you think it is. Two, now we're looking at the calibration and the accuracy of which we apply that. And three, especially if we're talking about corn, the impossibility we're doing to meet a nitrogen need with a manure without having other environmental issues, right? So I think manure is a part of this puzzle and one that we should absolutely use. But I think Dale's advice is perfect in that you have to know what you're putting out when you put it on so that you can follow up with what it needs later. I don't know, maybe that's bad advice, but I don't think that we can out manure a corn crop without having environmental issues or something that runs along with that.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's a hot thing right now. I mean, you could pretty much do a podcast just on some of these things with the manure because if you're using book values from the agronomy guide, they can sway 100% either way. And then how you handled it and put it in the field and the timing till you got rain, if we're in a no-till scenario, is big. So the only way to really gauge it is using in-season tools. And if you don't trust the green seeker or you don't trust the chlorophyll meter, I mean, we have 4 of them available in my area, just my county area, but there's some growers that would rather use a PSNT, and that's fine too. So you just go grab it, and if it's less than 25 parts per million, then you need to be putting more on. And that's perfect timing. And the manure testing, I'm amazed at how many growers think you can just grab one scoop and put it in the thing and test it, where, if you do multiple loads and you get a really good idea and you don't change your bedding and your feeding and everything from year to year, it'll be fairly consistent year to year when you're starting to spread that manure. But the chicken manure, depending on the manufacturer, some of them, they're changing their bedding every flock. Every flock gets in, and it's a lot of carbon in there. And that can alter how you do it. But that's off of planters. I wanted to get back to something that Ryan, before he changed position here, with soybeans. A lot of times when it gets warm like this, and I just talked to my neighbor, he just retrofitted his planter. This is kind of timely because we put the auto shut off on it and the down pressures and reduced inner diameter press wheels, all that kind of stuff. But one year we had a question like, it was March. It was middle of March and we had 75, 80 degree temperatures. I don't know if Dwayne or Justin remember that. And people were like, well, what do you think about putting it in the ground? And we didn't have any research in that area. So we went down to the research station and planted beans the end of March. And then we planted every 2 weeks all the way till the middle of June. And kind of coming back to the soil temperatures, Justin, the early planted March didn't have hardly any rhizobium, no nodules. So yeah, the plant grew. We had good stands, but we didn't have the nodules because you can't fight nature. If it wants to infect it, it will. But the best plantings came out of that middle of May because they had adequate nodulation. I think we surmised that it was just too cool for the rhizobium to interact and invade the root system.
That's, an interesting observation, Del, because, we've talked behind the scenes quite a bit about, what goes first, soybeans or corn, and maybe we'll leave that for another episode. But I think to your point there, right, even if the plant germinates, we need this warmer window of soil temperature for the rhizobia to form the nodules. So that's a really good point. Just because you can plant earlier and get plants doesn't mean it's always a good idea. And Dwayne, it looks like you had something. Do you mind if I move to the next question, or do you have?
No, I was just going to say, Dad used to say, all right, here we are. It's the 5th of May. It's time to plant corn. And oftentimes we see problems with folks being those tied into a date necessarily and not the conditions. So just, again, a plug to understand when conditions are right and the forecast looks like it's going to stay that way, then we can think about planning, but maybe not when conditions aren't the best
and
to do that.
I know we want to move on from this, but this is not an expensive or a difficult thing for you to check on your own, right? If you don't believe us or you don't think this is right, I have a very cheap $10 or less instant read meat thermometer that stays in the back of my truck that's got some tape on it at 2 inches. And, This is something, if you want to slam beans in the ground tomorrow, take a soil temperature, right? And then wait until you do your other ones and take a soil temperature of those. And this isn't going to be like great science, but you can probably correlate to yourself of, hey, these earlier ones, the soil temperature was X and they didn't do so well compared to Y at this later date, right? Like, it doesn't have to always be replicated and triplicated and stuff for you to do some on-farm citizen scientist type stuff work to see how this is going for you.
Yeah, and for those of us like Justin, I know you have really good eyes. My eyes are terrible, so I have a lot of growers that that there's those laser. If you pull the
Sure.
button,
Yeah.
it tells you the temperature. So you dig down and you point it at the bottom, 2 inches deep, and then I can read it. But I have a hard time reading the thermometers, and sometimes you don't know how long you have to wait till it actually, you stick it in the ground and you wait, and it changes and it changes, and when's it going to stop, and is it really stopped, or if you gun it. So I've been using one of those. I don't know what they're called.
Like
I
an
don't know.
infrared temperature.
Infrared.
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, everybody should be having some way
Yeah.
to do that. I think is important.
Yeah,
and the
I
other
was
thing,
just
too, before we move on, Ryan, if you request it too, especially if corn, not so, and beans, you can get the cold germ. So when let's say Dwayne wants to have a final stand of 30, I don't know what you run up there, 30,000 plants per acre, and you get 95% germ on your corn bag. That's what's the warm germ. But let's say it's 82% cold germ. Well, then you should base it, if you're planting early, you should base it off the 82, and then you're going to bump your population up based off the cold germ. Does that make sense to you? The warm germ on beans, I was at the seed pickup days last week answering questions as growers were picking up seed, and the beans are like 80% germination. So that's a loss of 20%, and that's warm germ. And if it's 75 or 70, that cold germ test, now you're really going to have to bump up another 30%. So that's sort of a point, not planter related, but for success, maybe request the cold germ numbers on it.
Del, do you know
wonder-
what a cold germ, like
Okay.
what temperature that is, right?
That was
Like,
my
so like when
question. Yeah. Thanks.
okay, yeah. So like
Me too.
when you're looking at these, right? And I haven't looked at a lot of bags, so like do they all have cold germ tests that they run? Only some of them, and then what temperature, at what soil temperature do I look at the cold versus the warm germ?
Yeah. So Ryan, when you figure that out, let me know. I don't work in those labs. I don't know what the cold germ test is. We can find it out.
So the Google, I was on the machine here, right? And it's saying 50 degrees Fahrenheit is where they're testing cold germination.
That seems cool to me, but not cool like that's cool. But I mean, cool from a temperature standpoint.
I
That
thought it was
seems
pretty cool stuff too. I'll keep digging.
So 50 would make sense. And that's for corn probably, and beans probably are 60 would be my guess, because that's the cardinal temperature for corn.
So Ryan,
right?
you may want to edit this out, but I think this is interesting. This is about soybeans. Seeds are planted in a soil mix and kept at roughly 50 degrees for 7 days to stimulate cold, followed by 5 to 7 days at 77 degrees to measure their recovery. So when they're doing this, I mean, it's what I guess to me, this looks at like this original conversation we were having about, well, I'm trending up towards 60, but it bottoms out and we go into 50 degrees for a few days, and now we ramp back up the other side. What is that recovery and that condition going to look like? So that's kind of interesting information.
Yeah.
Almost cool, right?
It's
Yeah, I
almost
mean,
cool.
If I was a grower, I would almost want I would almost demand I want the cold germ for me to make a early planting decision and know what to set my planter at.
Yeah, so it's basically telling us if you're planting at that around that 50-degree soil temperature, you should be thinking about searching out information on the cold germ percentage and adjusting accordingly.
Yeah. In a perfect world, right? And I know the rhizobiums are being bred genetically to have more cold tolerance, but I have not read the agronomy journal to see if anybody has, at least in our East Coast here, has done some early planted rhizobium infection studies. That's probably something that we need to consider at Penn State to look at some of these newer rhizobiums, whether they truly can inoculate earlier. But that's off the topic of planters. But
Yeah, no, I think
good
that's
stuff.
this is a good conversation because it reveals like there's more to this, right? And knowing how your plants are going to respond and I mean, as we're kind of reading what that cold germ temperature is, I mean, a lot of times, at least in my area, our soil temperatures are dipping into 50 at night. Most of the time, even into our, the later into May, planting window. So I think that's a pretty important temperature to know it, and maybe one that you plant based on, depending on if you really know that seed or not. And I was also doing a little bit of research here about rhizobium, and they do say that active window, the average active window is that 75 degree to 77 degree soil temperature. So that's kind of interesting too, in that, early infection or inoculation with the rhizobium is really important. So yeah, there's a little bit more to this.
Oh yeah, there's and that it's a great point because if growers are listening to us, it might stimulate them to maybe seek out more information relative to that by planting date. And Dwayne had mentioned about his dad with the May 5th, and the monkey in the room is global warming, and you can't go by dates because we keep warming. Whether we agree or disagree on how we got warm. I mean, I've been seeing growers plant earlier and earlier and earlier, and the fall's getting later and later. And last year, most of my growers were in the first week of April, like the end of this week, next week time frame, and that's where our big yields come from. And we didn't get the frost. A lot of them plant beans first before frost prevention because, beans have much more axial buds on their growing points, so to speak, where corn has one growing point. And if you don't have it deep enough and it's not protected by 1.5 inches of soil to buffer that frost, then you're in trouble. So, there's a lot of facets to that, but you can't ignore the fact that we're warming. And so we need to adapt to that. So a lot of the older farmers that maybe got burned 70 years ago, it's changed, So yeah, good stuff.
Yeah, and I think I'm glad you included there some of the frost tolerance when it comes to beans versus corn, because I think if you're listening to this conversation, you would start to think, okay, that means why are we planting beans all the time before corn, right? If we run into some of these issues with nodulation, the other end is that frost tolerance. But I think it's something that we should think a little bit more about, and I think we are thinking of doing an episode in the future on this because there's some nuance there, right? There's some maybe diversifying some of that risk between corns and beans is a better idea. So maybe we can jump into that next question now then. When we're talking about some of these temperatures and soil conditions that are like a little less than ideal, what can we do to set up our planter or, our seeding rates? I think we kind of covered seeding rates, but really setting up our planter, give those seeds a better shot.
Yeah, that's another big thing because I had a meeting the other week with a group and group of growers just informally, and they always hear me talk about super high populations. Some of our best yields are always in that 43,000 plants per acre. And I say, oh my gosh, we'd never do that. Never do that in Schuylkill County, right? Let's plant 20.
That's 2 crops in one for us,
And my comment is, if you do not have a good handle on singulation in your planter, then you should not be up in your population because those people that are planting 36, 38, and 40, you're getting standard deviations of less than 2 inches, which is almost a perfect stand. So if you're shooting for 3 or 3.5 between plants, I'm talking corn here.
Yeah, let's
you're not
back up a
deviating.
minute before we wander too far in here and set the stage.
Okay.
Let's talk about singulation, and what do you mean when you say that?
I mean the correct placement in the soil at the spacing that you have selected, and
Right,
you
we're
have
talking.
and you got to have your planter be able to do that.
And there's a lot of math that exists out there. If you want to look at like singulation tables, if you tell it kind of like what your population is, there are tables that'll give you a rough estimate of what that distance is because it's just a linear measurement over your acreage, right? So if you're wondering about your own singulation, look up one of these tables. You're on 30-inch rows. This is your population. It should tell you what that space is. Now, from there, now you're talking about the standard deviation of that space. What does that mean?
Yes, so that's a departure from your goal. So if you looked on that table and you should have a plant every 3 inches or every 4 inches, then that's what it should be, right? So if you've got wear on your double disc openers, where they're below 14 or 14 and a half, whatever the manufacturer has on there, and you are pushing seed back and forth between it. Or if you've got an older planter where the drop tube interrupts and you might get a double every once in a while instead of and a skip. So there's upgrades that you can put on to deliver the seed closer to the source so that you don't deviate from that. Having reduced inner diameter press wheels on the planter, that's a good investment because you're taking the pressure from the sidewall, which reduces the sidewall compaction. And then going back to the closing wheels, getting away from the cast iron systems where we tend to push it in, that can push the seed from your original deviation. So if you were drop the seed, everything's perfect, and you get to the press wheel and it's got a little bit too much pressure, because you're rolling between different fields. You set it for one field, you go to another, it's completely different. You push the seed, and now the seed's pushed over 3 inches from where it was. Those are all things that can happen that you need to be cognizant of to make the adjustments. So that's one thing our team, Justin and Ryan's going to be doing most of this for us, is going out and doing standard deviation of just to work with growers. And I'll give you an example. In one row unit, this was a 12-row unit, and we had deviations from 2 to almost 10 inches of deviation between planter units. So row unit 11 had some issue, and it turned out to be, it was just basically a pressure. There was a little crack in the line that changed the way that the seed was being delivered. And, those are the kind of things you have to, when you're starting to plan out, and go ahead and lift up the press wheels and start checking to see what you're getting down and make adjustments to individual row units as needed. Soybeans doesn't seem to matter. We didn't talk a lot about soybeans, but we've tried to do things with varying, a drill versus a corn planter versus dropping over and falling and dumping the bag out on the field. Doesn't seem to matter at all, but corn is a big one. So good question, Justin. Thank you.
Ryan actually asked that one, not Justin Dell, but that's okay. So my follow-up for this, you mentioned all kinds of great things: reduced diameter, reduced inner diameter, closing wheels,
Press
drop tubes, down pressure. Okay. So aside from the normal, all right, I know we've got to check our double disc openers, make sure they're good, make sure there's no burrs or broken dropped seed tubes in there. Is there one attachment that you would recommend before any others, an add-on for a planter? And I've got one in mind, but I want to know what you'd say first.
What the one thing that you would need to,
not to put you on the spot or anything, but
well, I'm assuming that you have row cleaners in the front, right?
Don't assume you know what that means, right?
I think and I'm assuming, let's caveat this because this is a no-till system.
Yeah, let's
right?
say it's a no
system because that makes a difference with what I would put on a planter. But I think that having a good set of sweeps on the front would be the first thing in my mind that I would want to make sure I can have one that's easily adjustable. So you can vary the depth of what you're doing, and it gives you a good 6 or 8 inches of path that you can allow the press wheel to do its job. If it's rolling over 3 inches of residue here and an inch of residue there as you're going across, you're not going to have a tabletop. And that's the goal, is to have everything germinate the same. You planted everything the same depth, it's all going to come up within 1 or 2 days. And if you've got this variation in seed depth, you're going to have that wave the whole summer. So my mind would be there. And then on the end of it would be having one spoke closed wheel and one caster plastic in the back.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
What's yours? I'm
mine.
curious.
Well, maybe we changed the game and I said no-till a little bit. I was thinking the seed firmer. What is your opinion on running a seed firmer versus not running one?
Oh, the Keaton Sea Firm. Yeah. Yeah. I am a fan, and I like the ones that that have the pop-up right
Yep.
in with the firmer. Yeah. I'm sorry. I missed that one.
And I think your suggestions are all great ones too. That the seed firmer on my mind was probably the first thing that I'd recommend to somebody to try to have if they don't have that on their planner.
Yeah, but from a return on investment, if you can't get a uniform depth of planting because you have no way to manage the residue in front of it, that would trump, I think, the deviation of stand. You want that tabletop, so it's critical to get that depth of planting to be perfect.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, let's
Right.
transition into another area, and let's talk about pests. So whether that is, disease, weeds, anything, what should farmers be thinking about, scouting for, even before planting time?
Well, that's a loaded gun. There's a lot to that. For a grower that never used manure, they need to be aware that even though we haven't had economic levels of them because people are by and large are controlling them, is seed corn maggot. And when you spread manure, it's no different than if you were to chisel your ground. When you release that smell into the air, every seed corn maggot fly for a mile is going to come into that field. And so we have to be thinking about that. So when we top dress manure, we're encouraging pests to come in and lay things there. Likewise, if you've got a lot of chickweed or green there, the cutworm moths that are flying right now are going to come up and they're going to like to find those egg laying sites. So now you have the western bean cutworm. I'm sorry, the cutworm moths that come from the south up here and drop eggs. So that's another factor that you're going to have some pest management there. Some growers, when they're going through and they're calibrating, you're telling me with the 1 year, you've seen a ton of grubs, the white grubs, so, these are things that you have to be kind of cognizant of when you're in your field. And if you're seeing things, then you might have to make an adjustment. So then the next question is, how do you deal with those pests? Well, not every BT product that you get is going to control cutworms. There's different events. So we can provide the viewers the handy BT trait table. Have you guys used that? So that was the number one thing at seed pickup days. I say, okay, you just bought this corn. It's got chrome. What does that mean on it? Or Agrosure. What does that mean? And you have to know, you have to kind of take it back and say, okay, well, this controls, NZ pest. And if it doesn't, then you might have to do something over and above that. From a disease standpoint, and Ryan, you can answer this too, but in my area, it's mainly Epithium in my area. Like if I get problems with stands early and I pull them and I send them to the lab, it seems like it's always Pythium as the main one. So your seed treatment, if you're using a fungicide, not the one that they're just putting on the seed for storage, I'm talking about fungicides that are on the seed at planting, you got to make sure it's the right chemical that will take care of, in my area, Pythium. It might be Rhizoctomia or Phytophthora in another environment, but in our area, Pythium is number one. And then make sure you have enough active ingredient on there because you can only get so much on that little seed. And so if it requires a quarter pound of active ingredient and you're getting a tenth on the seed, you might have to put an additional seed treatment on it planting, early planted where the water molds can be an issue. Does that make sense to you guys? So that's a pest. Seed corn maggots, if you're getting treated seed and it already has the insecticide directly on the seed, that's going to pretty much take care of it. If you're planting, a non-treated corn, more of a conventional hybrid that has no treatments on it, then we might have to go back to in-row insecticides if we have to control that. There's a lot to it, and these BT events are not all the same, and not all of them. Some of them are. I was reading on that BT trait table the other day that there's some that the bugs, the western corn rootworms, are resistant to it. And maybe we have that issue in Pennsylvania. I know Dr. Tooker has talked about that before. So if you've got that resistant population and you're buying BTRW that may or may not work on it, then you might be forced to look at other methods through the planter to put, a bifenthrin or something else in there. That would be a corn to corn. That's a big thing. I have some growers that were buying a full package corn and they're going into bean ground. Well, why pay the $18 fee for that bag if you're not going to have the pest?
Maybe that's the variety I really wanted. Maybe that was the racehorse, right? And they only offered it in the triple,
Yeah.
and I gotta buy it, right?
Yeah.
But those are tough decisions, and truthfully, a lot of that is what we try to maybe hit home here in tougher economic times. Figure out what traits you really need and get hybrids that match that.
Yeah, and Dwayne, if you look at some of the stuff, the economic return on some pests like European corn borer, when I first started here 30 years ago, we would spray for European corn borers, with Furidan and we had force and different things. But then once the BT came out, boy, we pretty much annihilated them. And sometimes some people are planting conventional corn and they don't even get a corn borer invasion. So what is the return on that on current times? So anyway, that's off planters, but you're going to deliver it through the planter. That's to me, it's field specific what pests you're going to end up showing. But slugs, that's where the planter comes in. Because if we're talking about slugs through a planter, then we need to have some way to clean the row out, keep the residue out. Then we need to put some kind of barrier. There's even some of those mini pellets that you can run through on your planter, the metaldehyde baits that you can put right there. That to me is like, it's all hands on deck. And when is it? Late April, early May is when those hatch out big time. If you're planting right into that window where the slugs are real heavy, then you have to pretty much adapt your planter right at that time. So great question on the pest part.
Yeah, and I think, Dale, you hit on something good at the end there, right? Especially for a lot of the insect pests, the early season insect pests, your corn seed maggots. I mean, that's where also proper row closure and some of the things you were talking about with sidewall compaction are going to be really important, right? So, like, we can, reduce the need for some insecticide treatments just by getting that seed in the right place. And, rely on some of those traits if you have good traits for when that corn or, kind of emerges. Yeah, and I think this is where probably the environment on the disease side matters as well, right? You kind of mentioned think of what problems you have in different fields. You mentioned Pythium. We have a lot of Pythium and Phytophthora kind of in our area, and it's really, you see it when the fields are laying wet, right? So another reason why we need to be thoughtful of planting conditions at planting. And then sometimes, you look at a season like last year where even if you got in April when we had good planting conditions and then it laid wet for all of May, there's only so much you can do on some level with some of those things. But a good fungicide coating is going to help you there. The right ones, because they're not true fungi, right? So you need to have the right fungicides in there.
Yeah, Ryan, I know, like for me, we have some river bottom ground along the Swati and down by the Susquehanna River. And those areas like that, you almost have to really have a really good disease package because we've tried. I mean, Greg Roth and I did some field trials at a farm near a river bottom, and we planted 3 times and the Pythium took it out all 3 times. It can be really frustrating when you have soils that are really in that condition where the water mold just take over.
Well, I think we're getting ready to wrap up our episode here, and Del, you really gave us a tremendous amount of stuff to think about in terms of our pre-planting planning for success here in 2026. So if there's one thing you'd say to our listeners that would pay off big dividends for them of everything we kind of talked about, what would be your takeaway message here? Give us 3 things that you'd like to have people consider.
Well, I would say number 1 would be take your time. And number 2 would be get off of the tractor and check frequently to make sure. I mean, I had a grower a number of years ago that row unit number 4 wasn't planting, and he had such a mouse nest in there. And, he thought it was the chemical because it looked like kind of a spray pattern. But when you went in there, I mean, he had a mouse nest in there. So, take your time. If he would have gotten off the tractor, he probably would have picked that out pretty quickly, checking. And then also the third thing is that every field you farm is different. So you have to check it when you change the field, you have to change what you're looking for and just reconfirm it. And just because you get a custom operator in to plant everything, trust but verify. Go out and look to see how he's doing it to make sure that it's correct and that you are getting good depth of placement and all of those kind of things. I think so. That's my 3 things. Just take your time. This is not a race. We don't have to go 100 miles an hour. I mean, I remember planting a test plot with a guy, and the planter was listing up out of the ground and dropping. And it was that was the last time I did something at that place. But we don't have to be in a rush.
So we're going to plug a couple episodes where we talked about some of these other concepts that we covered today. If you want to learn on any further, tune into season 1, episode 28, where we talked about slugs and slug management. And also then in season 4, episode 12, talking about the plant disease clinic and disease ID. So those are some episodes where you can drill down a little deeper on a couple of the topics that we talked about here today. So Ryan, I'm going to give you the honor since this is it for you, buddy. You can close us out in this episode.
Oh, this is a hard part. Well, thank you guys. Thanks for joining me on my last episode, guys. I really appreciate it. I know you have little choice, but it's been a lot of fun, and I've had a lot of fun on the show. And to our listeners, thank you for sticking with us. And it's been great to have you guys on our side. And I know you'll continue to be diligent listeners under Dwayne and Justin's leadership, and they're going to do a great job. So, signing off.
Here's one thing you can't say, Ryan. I'll catch you next time on Agronomy Highlights, right?
That's right. So I'll pitch it off to you. All right, Dwayne, now that I said my farewell, why don't you give the close here?
All right. Thanks, listeners, for joining us. Hey, we're smiling, and at the same time, we got a little tear in our eye to see Ryan take another venture. But thanks again for listening. Del, thank you for joining us, and we'll catch you next time here on Penn State's Agronomy Highlights.
You guys are great.